Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War update extra, I guess, an appendix to the hits and losses video from this morning, the 11th of November 2024. These are Andrew Perpetua's loss list for 3 missing days, the 6th, the 9th and the 10th. So that's yesterday, the day before, and then back on the 6th. He says, take note of the skull count. So just to remind you what Andrew Perpetua and his team do is they geolocate all this footage, they scour the socials and the internet for evidence of losses for both sides. They, very early on in the conflict, I remember Andrew saying, look, we look much more at Russian sources because we don't want to be accused of being biased. And so we look at a load of Russian Telegram sources to try and skew a kind of selection bias in favor of Russia, so that to make sure we're definitely catching all the Ukrainian losses, to make sure that we aren't being accused of being biased towards Ukraine. So when you look at these lists, bear that in mind, that actually it's difficult to accuse these guys of being biased towards Ukraine and not showing all the Ukrainian losses or overshowing the Russian losses. And so when we do have a ratio that favors Ukraine, we can be, I think, justified in thinking that that is genuinely what is going on to some greater or lesser degree. But the other thing they're doing is looking at deaths, visually confirmed deaths of human beings. And this is macabre, it's pretty horrible, but actually it's, I think, important work as well. So we also see primarily the lists are about, what piece of kit's been destroyed, how do we categorize that, what does that tell us about what's going on in war? And we can then measure that against the Ukrainian general staff figures for the losses for the day before and say, okay, or over that week, or just in general, and try and piece together the trends we get from the Ukrainian general staff and the trends we get from Andrew Perpetua, see if they match and see if we are justified in believing X, Y, or Z. Okay, that's the point of doing all this right throughout the war. And I think we've got a fairly accurate sense of what's going on the front lines. Finding out how many people die is also a trend that we can use to get a sense of whether these periods are periods of greater attrition for either side, but in this case they're counting out the Russian deaths, and we can see what the difference is between the Ukrainian general staff figures and of Russian personnel losses and visually confirmed losses. So this is literally people that you see die on camera, so it's horrible. What it doesn't include, and he goes on to say this, these 3 days have had 440 confirmed kills. This doesn't count infantry killed in vehicles. So if you've got an infantry fighting vehicle that blows up and everyone dies in it, unless you actually see that, it's not counted. Vehicle crews are not counted unless they are visibly shown to have died. So when you see one of these vehicles fundamentally blow up and there's no one gets out and you're thinking that whoever's in there is definitely dead, if you can't see them being dead, then they're not counted. So speaking of dead infantry, and he goes on to say that some vaguely, I presume, famous guy has died anyway. So on the 6th, they had 95. On the 9th, they had 108. On the 10th, they had 237. That's a phenomenally high number. So we have been seeing, so if we talk about the 10th and the 11th, the data today was the record number of losses today. And the day before, above 1,600. We have seen this is a 30-day rolling average high record for personnel losses. If you're starting to see a day of double the personnel losses, then we're justified. The point of this just little Andrew Perpetua post here is that it helps to justify. It certainly doesn't disconfirm, and it is evidence towards justification for the belief that Ukrainian general staff figures are correct, or at least largely correct. Okay, so we see a spike up in general staff figures of Russian personnel losses over the last 2 days, and we see a spike up in confirmed losses from Andrew Perpetua's visually confirmed data sets. I just want to explain all that. So this is how useful these kind of data points are for us. So let's go back to the earliest one. I think this must be from the 6th, and we can see that, yeah, that's the 6th. So the Russians, well, we go back to the Ukrainian losses, quite a lot of Ukrainian losses here. This is a 1-to-1. Combat asset losses are pretty similar in number. Ukraine is losing more combat assets here. So that's not a good day for the Ukrainians. They've lost a couple of bits of artillery. Surveillance and comm, though, is quite heavy there. So in general, I would take those bits of kit off the list as far as for what I use this for. Oops, sorry. Yeah, so there is that to consider. Tanks 4 tanks lost, or at least damaged. 1 Leopard 2A4 damaged there. Video shows it being towed back for repair. Claims to be an FPV drone damage. So that's good news that it's been towed back. That's one that's already been recovered, but it shows it's been damaged. Infantry fighting vehicle destroyed Bradley. APC, a captured FV432, so a British provided one. And then Humvees. Remember, the US should be providing another 2,000 Humvees. That's going to be well received. I'm hoping as they bring in, the rest of the money that's been apportioned from, or not quite yet apportioned, but has got through Congress for the appropriations bill, that they'll be getting a load of Bradleys before January the 20th as they're trying to use all that funding up. M113s and Humvees there, quite heavy on the APC list. About 50% destroyed, abandoned or captured. And then the MRAPs, 50% destroyed and abandoned. And they're all Western or indigenous ones. And then trucks and civilian vehicles. Now for the Russians, they've lost the Su-25 here. That is that's really going to be far more valuable than the entire Ukrainian loss list there. So that's a bad day at the office just on account of that. Some D-30 howitzers, command and control vehicle, that's going to be quite valuable. A number of tanks there, mainly destroyed. Half dozen tanks, 2/3 destroyed. 100% the IFVs destroyed or abandoned. Mixture of BMP 1s, 2s, 3s, BTRs. And then we've got a few APCs thrown in there as well. Civilian vehicles, trucks, and ATVs. So I would say that's a bad day at the office, worst day at the office for the Russians on account of that plane and command and control vehicle being in there. Otherwise, the Ukrainians have lost a fair amount of kit. Okay, so that's that one. We'll now look at what is going to be, this is the 9th. Yeah, okay, so Control 0. Let's have a look at this. Ukrainians losing about maybe half the amount that the Russians lost in terms of combat asset losses, probably about 2-1 Russian to Ukrainian. Let's look at Ukrainian losses here. And we see, taking out the Starlinks and whatnot, we've got 1 piece of artillery, a few tanks there, an M1 Abrams damaged by a Vandal drone. Bradley damaged as well in the infantry fighting vehicle section. And then the rest, APCs, MRAPs, eight of those, all Western provided apart from the MTLB thrown in there, Western provided or indigenous. The Kirpi is the Turkish provided MRAP. 3 of those destroyed, so that's a bit of a shame there, but not a great amount of kit, but an M1 Abrams on the list as damage. Now the Russians losing an air defense system, a destroyed Buk M3, electronic warfare piece of kit, a Brem 1 recovery vehicle on a boat, and an S60 artillery piece as well. Few tanks, and then quite a lot of infantry fighting vehicles, almost all of them destroyed and abandoned, so that's a bad loss list in that category. BMP 1s, 2s and 3s, or 2s and 3s actually, don't see a 1 there, and some BTRs, etc, etc. APCs, 100% destroyed, 5 of those on the list, MTLBs, BTR 80 and Tiger M, and then trucks, civilian vehicles, and quads, golf buggies, and what have you. So I think that is, especially when you've got an air defense system on there, certainly a worse day for the Russians than for the Ukrainians. And then we go on to the most recent list, and this is a pretty extensive list with maybe a 4-1 ratio of combat asset losses for the Russians to the Ukrainians. So that's very good for the Ukrainians. In terms of the total, though, it's probably about 2.5-1. In other words, the Ukrainians, when well, actually, you've got all these black ones at the bottom. These are civilian. Oh no, they're unknown vehicles. Actually, I could be wrong there. We're going to look at the Ukrainian. Yeah, those are unknown. So a lot of unknown vehicles. Not sure what they are. Okay. For the Ukrainian losses, we see some electronic warfare, surveillance and comms equipment. Got 1 tank, 1 ground drone. We have a half dozen infantry fighting vehicles, including 2 destroyed Bradley, or 1 destroyed, 1 abandoned Bradley, and 2 damaged Bradleys. So they are losing Bradleys. That's why I go back to saying I hope they get Bradleys on the next consignment of equipment. And then 5 APCs, all of them sort of Western provided there. Range of those, most of them damaged, luckily. And MRAPs, 1 captured Kirpi, 2 destroyed MRAPs, and a damaged Dingo 2. And fair bit of civilian vehicles there destroyed. And we go up to the Russian losses. We've got another electronic warfare loss. engineering vehicles, some artillery, nothing too significant. The usuals in terms of tanks, losing about 10 tanks there, track guarding sheds, range of other tanks, taken out predominantly by, drones, unknown causes as well, but usually I think you can assume there'd be drones. Infantry fighting vehicle, a lot of those, 20 plus on the list there, maybe more than 20 on the list. It's really heavy losses in terms of IFVs, BTR 82s, BMP2s, etc., etc. So really good day for the Ukrainians there of Russian losses. And then APCs, a number of those. Remember I told you the other day, or I do say often, that the Russians don't really use mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. I don't think they have too many of them in their own inventory. They don't manufacture many of them. They haven't got many types. The West produced an awful lot of different MRAPs, so the Ukrainians use them a lot more than the Russians. That probably indicates a greater survivability as well for the Ukrainian forces. They might lose more MRAPs, but kind of that's a good sign in a sense. I mean, you'd much rather be sending your troops in an MRAP rather than sometimes golf buggies, motorcycles. I don't think that they will be nearly as survivable. All right, then an awful lot of civilian vehicles on the Russian list as well, pickups, motorcycles, Bukankas, these low Scooby-Doo vans and whatnot. And mainly drones doing the work here. So there you go. Those are 3 days worth of data sets, and that's very useful. Thank you to Andrew who does that. Absolutely brilliant stuff, and really interesting, I think, concerning these personnel loss statistics, as I think that does track with the Ukrainian General Staff figures. 7,361 in the past 81 days. So the average is going to be just under 100 a day. So you can see the last couple of days there are tracking above average, and one really bad day, the 10th. So thank you for that again, Andrew. Anyway, hopefully that was useful for you. Thank you for your viewership. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.